Welcome. Thank you for joining me. My name is Dr. Carin at Brio Integrative Health Center in Richmond, BC, Canada. Thanks for joining us here. Today we're talking about tips for gut health during stress and quarantine time. But before I just dive into that, when we closed the clinic last week for in-person appointments, I know that all of the practitioners immediately wanted to continue to be of service to the community, especially now. And so this is the way that we're able to do that. And we're so thankful to be able to do that. Thank you to Dr. Neetu for teaching the rest of us how to use this. So thanks, Dr. Neetu. Of course, if you know of any family or friends or people that can use this information, please feel free to share this video or previous videos and do a watch party. We are going to be doing a Facebook Live every weekday, Monday to Friday at 4 p.m. So if we're going to be working on a bunch of different health topics, but if there's anything that you would like to request or recommend in terms of topics, just leave us a comment here. I'd be happy to address those. So right now there's a lot of tension, anxiety, uncertainty. We've certainly been talking about that over the past week with Dr. Neetu and Dr. Vanessa's live chats, and hopefully you've gotten some good information and tools from that. I know that even just with the change in routine, at home life can be quite difficult to navigate. I know that when I feel like things are a little bit crazy, I see myself almost like a boat sailing on an ocean, and the ocean right now feels rough. Feels like the winds are strong, the waves are pretty big, and it's pushing and pulling on my boat. And I know I try to find myself trying to make the boat stop rocking or stop being pushed by the wind, or I want to just stop the weather altogether and calm down the storm. But of course, a lot of those factors are outside of my control. And what I can control right now is my boat, and what I can do with my boat, what I can do to reinforce my boat, seeing the strengths and weaknesses there. And that's the opportunity that I see right now. There are a lot of things happening outside of me, but what is it that I can do? I hope that makes sense. Let me know if that makes sense for you. And I hope that with these Facebook Live chats, we're trying to give you a little hint or tips on how to strengthen your boat as we weather through the storm together. So again, what we're talking about today is tips on gut health, and especially during times of stress and quarantine. So what I want to do is, before we look at what to eat or which foods to focus on, I want to give a few tips on how to make sure that your digestion is actually turned on or dialed up, so you can actually get more out of what you're eating and out of your supplements. So I'm going to be talking about timing, number one, and then about taste, which I'll explain what I mean in a sec. And then at the end, we'll talk about a few different foods that I would recommend incorporating or focusing on right now. So first of all, timing. When I say timing, I'm talking about the day and night rhythm. You've probably heard about day and night rhythm and circadian rhythm when we're thinking about energy and sleep. So this is that innate rhythm that we have in the body to make sure that you have energy during the day, but that you're sleepy at night, right? There's essentially opposite things has to suddenly happen, and it has to be all coordinated together. But this innate circadian rhythm is not just for your brain, for your energy, and for your sleep, but also for your gut health. So this pattern actually coordinates when you're going to break down food, absorb nutrients, when your liver is going to detox, when your gut is going to actually repair itself, when you're going to produce hormones, for example. The gut actually makes melatonin, for example. When you're going to have bowel clearance, you probably have seen that that's very based on day and night cycles. But with anxiety, worry, changes in routine, these coordinated day and night patterns can get really thrown off. And you've probably seen that just with maybe past travel, when your routine is off and you're getting constipation, for example. Hi, Nitu. So we've got these changes that kind of get thrown off, and then our gut gets uncoordinated because of that, right? And why is that? Of course, that's the nervous system and the adrenal system trying to protect us. And Dr. Nitu talked about this last week, a lot about how adrenals can impact the rest of the body. And what the nervous system is trying to do, of course, here. And first of all, the nervous system is something that Dr. Lee will be talking about in a few days, I believe, maybe next week on the masterclass, all about the brain and the nervous system. But just to give you background, the nervous system we're talking about is the brain and the nerves in the body that take all of the information that we perceive and incorporate it and coordinate all of our body systems to react to that environment. So one of the ways that it does that, the nervous system does this, is to either dial up or dial down digestion. So this is where the connection between stress and digestion can come together. So obviously then with stress, when there's stress of the uncertainty of the future or an acute stress, or there's a lion chasing you, that's going to make the nervous system dial digestion down because it's just not important in the immediate moment. So the interesting thing about this in timing I've found is that it's a little bit like shallow breathing. So if you have really acute digestive symptoms, like if you have gas and bloating, if you have diarrhea or constipation on an ongoing basis, we know that there's something going on with your gut. But a lot of times, the digestion is suppressed without us knowing. So that's where I see it a little bit like shallow breathing, is that you don't have to have asthma or shortness of breath for it to actually become a problem in the long run. So this is where you can start to see where digestion might be leading down the road to something like chronic low iron or issues with yeast or bacterial overgrowth. And that's where it's really, really important that with every patient, we're looking at digestion and assessing how well digestion is happening. So going back to that circadian rhythm and timing for the gut, one of the ways that we can actually reinforce the circadian rhythm for our gut is by eating. So you've probably heard when Dr. Nitu was talking about sleep and circadian rhythm, she had mentioned light being a really important signal to reinforce that 24-hour pattern. But when it comes to our gut, eating is a really good cue to the body for it to know what time of day it is. And generally, eating means it's daytime. So one of the big tips I would recommend right now is to have really consistent meal times and have those meal times during the daylight hours. So that might mean that for you, dinner has to be a little bit earlier than you are now. For example, doing maybe eating up to 8 a.m. for breakfast and 11 or 12 for lunch and then 5 o'clock for dinner. Something like that, but something that's consistent and around the daylight hours is what I would recommend with that. Now, what about the other side? What about fasting then? So when I say fasting, I'm talking about not eating or consuming calories. So that would include drinks that have some sort of calories in it. So drinking water would not be considered eating. It would still be considered fasting. So what's the deal with fasting and why is that important? So first of all, fasting makes sure that we're not giving that cue to the gut that it's daytime, right? But also fasting is really important because remember that your gut tract is about 25 to 30 feet long. It's really, really, really long. And then that's mostly the small intestine that's making up that length. So what we want to make sure is that after you've eaten, that food gets a chance to not just go through your stomach and into your small intestine, but it actually clears the small intestine all the way through and all the way down to the large intestine. Now, once it's in the large intestine, it can sit there for a little bit longer. Hopefully not that long, but it can sit there for longer. What's really, really important, though, is that we make sure that we give enough time after a meal for that food to go through and that partially digested food to get through the small intestine. And this is taking generally about 2.5 to 3 hours for most people after you eat to actually get the gut to propel that undigested or partially digested food down the tract. And the really important thing about that also is that there's bacteria that's actually getting swept along the intestines, the small intestine, and being swept into the large intestine. And this is one of the most important things about preventing microbial overgrowth in the intestines, in especially the small intestine. So I generally recommend avoiding snacking between meals because of this. Because you want a nice, clear 3-4 hour fast between your meals, just to allow this to happen. What happens is if there's some undigested food left there, or that there's bacteria left in the small intestine in large amounts, then the next time that you eat, you're going to be feeding that bacteria, and that's where that microbial overgrowth can happen. And when there's microbial overgrowth in the small intestine, that can cause gas and bloating. Regardless of what kind of bacteria, whether it's good or bad bacteria, there really shouldn't be a large amount in the small intestine, and that's the issue there. So try to just keep a good 3-4 hour fast in between your meals. So no snacks, for the most part. Not saying that there's anything wrong with snacks, but just as a treat, not on a daily basis. For the same reason, we want to try to finish eating about 3 hours before bed. So we've got that clear, lots of time after dinner to clear out that small intestine. And then there's other sort of extra things that happen during the overnight fast. So obviously the overnight fast is that longer fast, right? Typically maybe 8 hours, maybe 12 hours, something like that, maybe longer. During that time is actually a really important time, particularly for your gut. So the one thing is once the food actually goes right through and it's cleared out, this is the time when the gut can finally repair itself, repair that really precious lining of the gut. This is also the time where the liver actually ramps up its functions in detox. So the liver is involved in digestion. So if you're still eating, there's still food in the gut during this time, the liver is going to pivot and work on that. But once the food is out of the digestive tract, then the liver can do all of its detoxification functions. And that is such an important point to reducing inflammation in the body. Most of the time, I don't have to encourage people to or remind people to eat, but sometimes there's a little bit of less understanding about what's going on with fasting. So I think it's also important to remember that not only is there gut repair, liver function ramping up, but also from a Chinese medicine point of view, eating and fasting are a little bit like yin and yang. One is not more important than the other. We absolutely need both. Same with breathing. Breathing in is not more important than breathing out. We need both of those. And so generally speaking, I recommend about 12 hours for eating time and about 12 hours for fasting time, at least is a good place to start. I think Dr. Neetu mentioned this before as well, but right now intermittent fasting is really popular. that's something that you definitely want to talk to your naturopath about doing, whether that's something that will work with you, because that's going to be more dependent on, so intermittent fasting is a longer overnight fast. That's going to depend on what your adrenal status is or what your insulin levels and blood sugar regulation is like. So that's something to look more, get more individualized recommendations for. So that's timing. So just to summarize what we were just talking about there, making sure that you're eating meals at consistent times of the day, eating during daylight hours. When you're fasting, 3 or 4 hours between meals is a good guideline, I think. Finishing eating about 3 hours before bed. And then during that fasting time is the best time to be hydrating. So non-caloric drinks, of course, during that fasting time. All right, the other way that you can turn up digestion or dial up digestion is actually using taste. So in traditional Chinese medicine, there's 5 different tastes, and those different tastes essentially nourish the organ systems. And we want to nourish all of the organ systems in a balanced way. So sweet, bitter, sour, spicy, and salty. Those are the 5 flavors or tastes. And generally in Western diets, we tend to kind of be heavy on the sweet side. And when in Chinese medicine, we're talking about sweet, we're talking about a lot of more grain type of sweets or carb, starchy type of sweets. So like rice would be considered sweet. So with these heavier sort of starchy diets, Western diets, we tend to lag a little bit on the bitter side. And this is the part that it can be a really, really helpful way to turn digestion up a notch. What happens with bitter foods, and you can imagine even now biting into a lemon, even if you're just imagining that, you can feel the saliva coming to your mouth. And it's not just the saliva that's part of this reflex. Your pepsin in your stomach acid will start to be secreted. The bile from your liver and gallbladder will start to come out. There's digestive enzymes from your pancreas as well. All of these things essentially start digestion just with the taste, and just with the thought of the taste, even that neural reflex is stimulated. So a way that you can do this right now is taking that bitter flavor and putting those foods with that bitter flavor into your everyday meals. So these foods are things like citrus peel, arugula, artichoke, dandelion leaves, bitter melon, something to try, a little bit more intense, but really, really great. A lot of traditional cultured foods are this kind of a sour bitter combination as well. So pickles, sauerkraut, kimchi, all of these kinds of things can be good for getting your digestion going. A lot of these kind of sour bitter foods are also used to help with reflux and nausea because of the same digestive tract activation. Essentially, from a Chinese medicine point of view, it's thought to allow us to descend, for the food to descend, go downwards, which is in digestion, that's what we want, is go downwards. You can also, of course, we've talked about this before, get bitter herbs that do the same type of things. These are commercially prepared tinctures, alcohol-based tinctures that use really bitter herbs, and gentian would be the classic one here. So this is something that you can just put in a little bit of water and drink before a meal. This just to make it really convenient, that's something that you can do. So this is not for somebody that has active gastritis or ulcers, but otherwise it's very well tolerated. Okay, so that's what I mean by taste. There are a couple other things that I like to do to support digestion, and this is not the last time we'll talk about digestion for sure. But for today, it's the timing and the taste that I really wanted to go over. And I want to just make sure my time is okay here. What I want to talk about next is just a few of the foods that we can incorporate into our day to help with gut healing. So you probably heard from yesterday with Dr. Lee's Facebook chat that some of the great things that he was eating for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and there's some great examples there. One of the things that I definitely would want to reiterate is making sure that we're being careful about keeping those food sensitivities to a minimum right now. So remember that your 80% of your immune system resides in your gut. So being extra careful with what foods that we're actually eating and triggering in our gut is really important, especially right now. So some of the most common food sensitivities are dairy, soy, gluten, eggs as well. So definitely, if you know that you have those food sensitivities, try to keep the minimum right now. If you're not sure what your food sensitivities are, we can help you with that, doing food elimination or some testing and that sort of thing to help you guide you through that. One of the things that I would just mention when you're looking at food sensitivities is don't just look at what's going on with your gut, but notice what's happening also with changes in your skin, like skin rashes or joint pain. Even things like headaches and migraines can be triggered by food sensitivities. So this will give you some idea that that particular food is connected to your immune system via your gut. So another one that I would look at right now, especially if you tend to be like me, tend to produce phlegm or mucus in your throat or sinuses. Right now, we're kind of at that shoulder season where between flu season and allergy season. So if that's you, dairy is one of the things I would just absolutely double check that we're not getting too much of, because that can definitely contribute to even more of that mucus and phlegm. And of course, like Dr. Lee mentioned yesterday, avoiding sugar, of course. When we say sugar, we're not just talking about the table sugar, but also simple carbohydrates. So the refined flours that are used in commercial baking, for examples. Those kinds of sugars can weaken the ability for our body to fight invading bugs. So those are definitely areas that you want to look at, foods that you want to be avoiding. So far, that all makes sense? Throw me a little thumbs up or something to let me know that it's all making sense for you so far. Okay. Now, a couple of little areas of what foods that you want to incorporate. So veggies to me are the center of my meal. And the reason is because the vegetables are going to have all of those vitamins and minerals that we're looking for, or many of them, particularly antioxidants. So one of the great ways to think about this to help you with the shopping process and to just make sure that we're getting a variety of vegetables is to use this, what I call the 3 groups of veggies that I adapted from the Walls diet from Dr. Terry Walls. She looks at the 3 groups of vegetables, the leafy greens, colorful, and cruciferous or sulfur vegetables. So these are trying to make sure that you have a cup or 2 or 3 of each one of these groups of vegetables helps you to make sure that you're getting a variety of these vegetables in your food or in your day. Because we all know that we need to eat lots of vegetables and we need to eat more vegetables, but how do we make sure that we're getting a variety? How? Because each different kinds of foods, we're going to get different profile of antioxidants and vitamins. So again, the 3 groups being leafy greens, that's where you're going to get folate and vitamin C. So those are like salads and microgreens and sprouts, kale, those kinds of things. And then the colorful vegetables are pretty much anything that's not green. So colorful bell peppers, even I would put berries into this category, carrots, beets, those kinds of things there. And then the cruciferous vegetables. So those are the ones that have the sulfur component into them. So they are kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, mustard greens, arugula, and also the garlic and onions also have that sulfur. And so what's really important about sulfur is that it helps with your liver function, because the sulfur is used to make glutathione, which is a really powerful antioxidant. So that can be really helpful, especially when we're trying to boost up our immune system and make sure that we can address any inflammation that comes up. Okay, of course, we're always jumping on and trying to keep these to about 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm a little bit going behind here, but I just want to add in just one more thing, which is glutamine. Glutamine-rich foods are something that would be really, really helpful right now for your gut. So glutamine is an amino acid, so a building block of protein that's actually almost like food or a nutrient for the cells in the gut lining. So it helps your gut lining repair itself. And it's also used to actually make glutathione again. So there's that same very, very powerful antioxidant. So for this reason, for immune health, for gut health, having lots of glutamine-rich foods is really, really, really helpful. Dr. Lee mentioned bone broth yesterday. That's one that has a lot of glutamine-rich compounds in there. But other things like cabbage is really good for this, parsley. If you can find really good quality organ meat, this is a really great place to get glutamine as well. Just as a note here, glutamine-rich foods and cabbage just reminded me, I am going to be doing a Facebook Live, I think it was next week, on some really easy recipe that you can use to help increase the amount of bitter foods and sour foods into your diet, but also glutamine-rich foods. So please look out for that. All right. So just to summarize some of the things that we were talking about today, number one, timing when it comes to food. Remember that your gut has a day and night cycle. And so for us, that means eating and fasting time. So when it comes to eating, consistent meal times during the daylight hours, fasting, that's between your meals, so avoiding snacks most of the time, and then finish eating about 3 hours before you head to bed, so that you've got a nice about 12 hours of fasting overnight to allow your gut to repair and allow your liver to really ramp up its job. And then the second point there is the taste. So particularly bitter foods to incorporate into your diet to really dial up that digestion, especially during this time when things are routine's a little bit off. There's a lot of things on our minds, and that tendency for digestion to get suppressed is much, much higher right now. So using food and the taste of the food can be really helpful for this. Either you're using a bitters tincture or just incorporating some more bitter tasting foods. And then lastly, some of the foods that I would definitely focus on right now is number one, glutamine-rich foods like cabbage, and then getting those 3 groups of vegetables in consistently every day. Start with maybe 1 cup of each of the leafy greens, colorful and cruciferous. And if you're already doing that, try maybe 2 cups of each of those per day, or even more than that. But the idea is just to try to consistently make sure that you've got all the variety in there. Essentially, that is our multivitamin for us. And of course, veggies are even better than multivitamins. I'd say veggies are what multivitamins aspire to be. So if we can use our veggies to be that multivitamin, as long as we're doing that variety consistently, we're going to be really ramping up the nutrients and antioxidants in our body. So those are a few of the tips that I've got for today. This is definitely not the last time that we're going to be talking about gut health. There's more to come, but before doing anything else, I always want to make sure that we're aware of how we can use eating and fasting and bitter tastes to help support digestion in the first place, so that we can actually digest and absorb the nutrients in our food and our supplements first. I hope that was helpful for you today. I hope you were able to get one or two tips in there to help with your eating routine. I'll definitely be back doing the masterclass this Saturday next. That's going to be on increasing energy using the secrets of nature. And then I'll be back next week talking about some recipes on the bitter, sour foods that we were talking about and the glutamine-rich foods. So next week, I'll be taking you to my kitchen. All right, I hope that was very helpful. Let us know if you have any particular topics that you'd like to hear about next. Leave that in the comments section. Please feel free to share this video or any other videos to anybody you think that could use this information. And again, we'll be here Monday to Friday, every day at 4 o'clock doing the Facebook Lives. And then we'll be back here on Saturday, I believe it was noon, to do the masterclass. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye.